Dr. Henry Louis Gates went away, came home, couldn't get into his house. It's alleged that he and his driver used force on his front door and back door to gain entry to his house. It's alleged that a neighbor who wasn't familiar with Dr. Gates called the police, and the police arrived. Sergeant Crowley apparently was the first police officer arrived. He's the only person involved in this controversy. And when I start giving grades, I'm going to give a low grade for him responding to a burglary in progress call by himself in the first place. It appears as though he was the only person there. Now, at the beginning, now certainly other officers came as things got out of hand, but I'm talking about from the onset. It appears as though, from evidence and information that has been released, that Sergeant Crowley was the first responder and was there pretty much alone during this initial contact with Dr. Gates. Sergeant Crowley had to identify Sergeant Gates. He had to know who he was, because personally he didn't know him. So he requested identification. Exactly right. Proper procedure. There were some indications that Dr. Gates didn't particularly want to give up identification, but subsequently gave up his identification, Harvard ID and driver's license, according to information published about Dr. Gates. Dr. Gates apparently wanted some identification from the sergeant. So he asked him what is customary for citizens, what is your name and your badge number. It appears, though, just from evidence received, that the officer was reluctant to give up his identification to Dr. Gates. Things began to escalate. And I want you to remember now, Dr. Gates is in his home. The sergeant has identified him as not a burglar, but the residence. And that could have and probably should have been a done deal from that point. But some mouthing went on, some woofing and tweeting from one side and then the other. And apparently tempers flared. We have a very well-educated university executive, but a bit agitated. We have an experienced supervisor from the police department who apparently too became agitated. So what do we do in a situation like this? The professor is at home. He wants the officer to get out of his house, but he wants to get some identification. The officer wants, apparently, the professor or the executive not to talk at him, demean him, berate him, whatever terms that we can squeeze out of what happened up in there. I've heard some people say on radio talk shows and television shows, Dr. Gates should have just sucked it up, let it go, not instigate or agitate the situation. Well, that's always expected of black men, isn't it? When we're dealing with the system, we should always suck it up. We should always shut up. We should always just take it. we should just humble ourselves and overlook it. The police officer, on the other hand, I've heard many people say, including the Black Police Association nationally, say that the police officer, once he identified Dr. Gates as a resident, should have immediately ended his business. And based on my police experience, should have apologized to the doctor for, having to take him through those changes of identification, but explained to him that he didn't know him and explained to him what the job requires. But did the officer do that? No, the officer did not do that. The officer took apparently the position that is just too prevalent in police departments in the first place: you better watch what you say to me. You can't talk to me like that. And I'll show you who has the power here. Because Dr. Gates reportedly, according to the Atlanta Voice, said that Dr. Gates said to Sergeant Crowley that you haven't seen the last of me yet. You haven't heard the last of me yet. And based on my experience, most police officers don't take bad-mouthing them lightly, because they always have the opportunity to have the last word. They have the handcuffs. They have the computers and the typewriters once they get you back to City Hall.